Although the Middle Ages are often defined as a time of knights, chivalry, the development of universities and their intellectuals, tradesmen and the expansion of their crafts were vital to daily life for those who lived throughout the Middle Ages. Most communities relied heavily on the craft masters and their businesses. The guilds were a key factor in keeping these tradesmen's businesses successful. The guild held great importance towards each township on a social and professional level. As explained in depth in Carus's book, From Boys to Men, the masculinity of these tradesmen depended heavily on the guild. In the early Middle Ages, tradesmen would form loosely organized groups in order to protect their businesses. Threats to these tradesmen, such as out-of-towners coming in and selling their goods at a reduced price, threatened the town's businesses. The well-established masters of their communities banded together and drove newcomers from their town in order to protect their crafts and livelihood. By the 10th and 11th century, guilds had begun to form, with many crafts sharing the same guild house. As the guilds grew, they became more involved with the towns. It was common for political leaders to be members of these guilds. Rules and regulations were implemented over time, and by the late 12th century, each craft had established their own guild. The guild continues to be an important part of the European economy through the 19th century. Guild officers were generally composed of masters of the craft. The guild officers, called councils, were elected by the members and strictly constrained by the states of the guilds. These officers were very powerful throughout their communities. They would frequently act as judges for guild disputes, collect guild dues, and administer guild property. Some would hold public office. Most guilds hosted 2 to 6 officers. These men were empowered to create statutes and enforce provisions of existing statutes. The officers held the power to inspect shops and their masters to ensure quality workmanship and moral stability. The officers would preside over each guild assembly, along with representing their guild and its interests to the town councils. In order to protect the guild shops and its members, the masters would initiate any prosecutions against violators of the rules and regulations. People who violated these rules were charged a small fee. This fee was used by the guilds to purchase means of enforcing their statutes upon serious violators, often consisting of community outsiders. The guilds were allowed by the city council and local laws to prosecute anybody violating guild statutes by violent force if necessary. Most violators were driven from the towns and often had to travel great distances since guilds in the area would be in close contact. The path to manhood for the apprentice took many years of careful imitation of their masters, both socially and professionally. Apprenticeship throughout these guilds was the most efficient way for an underling to eventually reach the level of journeyman, where he could then be a day laborer to travel and improve upon his skills. Many guild statutes were directed at the apprenticeship directly, taken from the guild regulations of the Shires of Arras, 1236. And an apprentice owes the fraternity for his apprenticeship 5 solidi. Most statutes include all levels of the guild. And if masters, or journeymen, or apprentices stay in the town to do their work, they owe 40 solidi if they have won this without the permission of the aldermen of Arras. These apprentices would live with their craft masters and were expected to follow the rules of his household and treat his master as a father. Journeymen were often hired as workers for the masters of their shops. Although the guild had statutes on how much journeymen should be paid, their pay was often relatively low. The guild penalties towards those who did not pay fair wages. And if a master does not give a journeyman such a wage as his due, then he shall pay 5 solidi. The path to manhood for these men included frequently the taverns and consuming large amounts of alcohol. Also common among the journeymen, and another form of showing their masculinity, included gang rape, which also served as a form of bonding for these men. This became such a large problem in some communities that the town leaders and the guild officers would push for opening of town brothels in an attempt to reduce these acts. Although women were not usually members of the guilds, they were very important to the guild shops. Most wives of masters handled the accounting side of each business, along with dealing with the customers directly. In the later Middle Ages, women from the cloth industry became shop owners themselves and would hold title of master with apprentices of their own. However, outside of the cloth industry, it was very uncommon for a woman to be an owner of a shop or hold the title of master. There were few exceptions for owning a shop. If a woman was married to a master and he passed away, the guild would allow her to operate the business under very close guild watch. Like the journeymen, journeywomen would often have to move town to town every couple of months or years. They were paid less than the journeymen and often had a harder time finding work. Most would work for a master at a bake shop or clothing shops. It was not uncommon for journeywomen to help with the accounting and working on the retail side of each businesses. The evidence of women artisans in mixed guilds is just the tip of the iceberg for their actual artisan activities. However, for recent studies have shown that despite legal exclusion from most guilds, most women practiced artisanal trades nearly everywhere. These journeywomen would usually house with whomever they were working and were expected to help with the cooking, cleaning, and other household tasks. Journeywomen would often marry a master or an apprentice because their experience would aid them in running their own shops or businesses. The path for a journeyman to become a master was generally long, if it happened at all. Guild restrictions and requirements were very strict and often required large sums of money in order to acquire the items necessary to become a master. To be admitted to the mastership, the worker had to demonstrate his skill in all aspects of the crafts by creating an object or a series of objects that conformed to specific requirements. Other requirements set up by the guild, and in some cases town laws had to be met, and the guild would often vote to bestow the title of master upon a journeyman. Most journeymen could not afford all the necessary items required to make said masterpiece. Those that could gather the money needed and effective create their masterpiece were usually rewarded with the much desired title of master. In theory, the masterpiece would ensure that the new master had sufficient knowledge of the craft to practice it effectively and to train apprentices. Even though some masters would work for others, owning the title of master for each craft had indicated labeled the artisan as a man, showing that he had proved his masculinity through years of hard work and an abundance of knowledge in his craft. The guild provided for their communities in various ways, even beyond that of the guild members. Although the guild allowed artisans of each craft to get together on a social and professional level, these guilds would also play a large role in community protection. In most towns, the guild members were required to serve as town watch and would be called upon to handle threats against their community along with neighboring communities. The fees and dues required by the members of these guilds provided them with the weapons necessary to perform these tasks. They weren't only protecting their family and businesses, but the livelihood of their communities. The guild helped establish a system in which tradesmen and artisans could conduct business through communal ties and statutes. It helped members by providing them with social cohesion and protection of their communities. The guild and its economic system impacted and dominated the European economy for a millennium, made possible through its ever-changing statutes and willing of community protection and social statuses.